This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. Join the union to vote on albums, pick one to discuss with us on the show, get access to bonus episodes, and our private Discord community. Keep the podcast ad-free and make the next episode happen by joining us at digmeoutpodcast.com. All right, gentlemen, we are back with another of our Surviving the 90s episodes. This is a new idea we kicked off last year and are continuing this year. We started with a band people know, but we wanted to look at if they survived the 90s, and that was Styx. And then we did Billy Squier to see if he survived the 90s. And now we're on our third. And this was the one, I believe, Chip, that you said if there was a band that we were going to do, this is the one that's on my list.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us who that is?
Yeah, it's Foreigner. So I, in the 90s, sort of ignored all these classic rock bands because I was trying to be hip and cool and follow the grunge and pop punk and new metal and whatever else was coming out. And so all the bands that I grew up listening to, I stopped listening to them. I didn't pay attention to them. And I remembered at some point, it's probably 15 years ago, I remembered that Foreigner had put out a record, at least at the time I was familiar with only one record. And I knew that Lou Gramm was not on it. And so I went on a search to find a copy somewhere. And it took me a little while. But that album, Unusual Heat, is an album that I was just interested in finding out, did I miss out on anything in the 90s by not listening to them, or did they just sort of sink? And so this is a prime example of a band that I was really interested in covering on this because it gave me a chance to go back and listen to stuff that I either knew about and ignored, or in some cases, as I'm sure we'll get to, Foreigner put out a second album in the 90s that I didn't know existed until just a couple years ago. So, yeah.
You weren't alone. For most of these bands, I think we're finding that even if we didn't actively ignore them, you had to put in energy, at least for the three we've talked about so far. We're going to get into here. You had to put it in energy to go find their new releases because it wasn't being put in front of you. It wasn't on the radio. It wasn't really in the MTV or written about very much. So.
And that's a good point. That's as much on the labels and MTV and the radio as it is on the bands themselves. The bands, as we've already discussed with Styx and Billy Squier, I mean, they were still putting out material. It just wasn't landing with anybody because the labels and radio and MTV were more interested in breaking young new bands.
And you start to see some label switches too, like kind of their big contracts are expiring or they're dropped. And that seems to be part of the story here. So wherever they land probably doesn't have the same budgets. And if they do, they're certainly not going to put it into a band from the 70s or 80s.
Right.
So I'm going to be honest. Like, I knew Foreigner radio singles, but I never in my life went and listened to a Foreigner album. They were just one of those bands that was just on the radio or on MTV. Excuse me. They were on VH1. Let's be honest. They were not. I mean, maybe at the beginning of the 80s, they were there, but by the end of the when did VH1 actually start? Is what I'm curious, because they were a band that was like made for VH1. I didn't really know any of them in terms of the members, and I didn't know where they were from. They kind of sounded British to me, which is strange because Lou Gramm is from Rochester, New York.
Right.
But Mick Jones, the guitar player, does he sing at all in the band?
No.
Okay, he's from England, so somehow he has imbued his Englishness onto the rest of the band to make them sound.
Foreigner.
Yeah, he's the foreigner. Well, drummer Dennis Elliott, also British.
See, you you dug in. I was gonna quiz you guys to see if you could name anybody in the band besides Lou Gramm and Mick Jones.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, come on.
And in the original band now, I can
Yeah.
name Jeff Pilson and Kelly Hansen now, but
Yeah. Oh, and Tim, real quick, VH1 started in 1985.
Okay, so it's entirely possible that on the back half of the 80s, Foreigner was on there.
Yep.
Their multi-instrumentalist of Ian McDonald, who was previously in King Crimson. He's English, but their keyboard player, Al Greenwood, American, also from New York. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then bassist Ed Gagliardi, Brooklyn. So this band was like split down the middle between like New York and England, which is interesting. Interesting that they came together that way. They had all been in different bands. Mick Jones had been in the Leslie West band. He was in Spooky Tooth, which is one of those bands where I've heard the name and I have no idea what Spooky Tooth sounds like.
Somebody nominate them for a 70s episode.
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of an awesome band name for a 70s band.
They were all like in bands who were in bands. They were like in Rod Stewart's band, and they were in, like I mentioned, like Leslie West's band, and they were like a bunch of guys who were in different. Ian McDonald was in King Crimson. So they were listening to a concert by Spooky Tooth, and Lou Gramm was the singer. No, sorry, Black Sheep.
Black Sheep.
That's the name of the band. They must have played with Spooky Tooth. So they played with Black Sheep, which is a Rochester band that I'm sure the people of Rochester celebrate the catalog of Black Sheep, but I have no idea what any Black Sheep songs are. And so they basically just started assembling this band of all these guys from different areas. I think Mick Jones was kind of was the one putting it all together and assembling people. Al Greenwood had played in a band called Storm, which again is a very 70s sounding band. I think at one point they were called Trigger, and that was changed that was their demo tape, which was given to who? If you're going to give a demo to a hard rock guy, it's going to go to John Calander, former journalist, radio programmer. He did A&R at Atlantic, and that's how they ended up getting signed. They put out, when was the first album out? That was
77.
That's the self-titled, which opens with Back to Back. We'll get into it. Feels Like the First Time and Cold as Ice. First album, back-to-back singles are the first two songs. That's not bad. So that, needless to say, they did okay right out the gate. They made it to number 4 on the US Billboard 200. They sold 5 million copies of the debut, which is funny because I look at that album cover and I know Foreigner album covers from flipping in the bins. I don't remember this album cover. It's just the 5 of them or 6 of them standing around in like trench coats with suitcases in front of train tracks, but it's like a painting. It looks like, they could be a jazz band. There's nothing to indicate that this is a rock band. And then Double Vision is where they finally put on some leather jackets. And they're like, okay, this is a rock band. I understand what's going on. But then they followed that up, number 4 on their first album, number 3 on their second album, Double Vision, which sold 7 million copies. So think about that. 12 million copies of your first 2 records. That's bonkers. And those are both in the 70s, 77, 78. Then in 79, you follow that up with Head Games. That goes to number 5. So you got 4, 3, 5. That sells another 5 million copies in the United States. We're up to 17 million on the first 3 albums. That's like Zeppelin territory. Like that's crazy. I didn't really get how popular Foreigner was until I looked at those chart numbers.
And I think I was just a kid in those days, so I don't know if any of this is what I'm about to say is true, but I think that shows the power of radio, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there, like MTV was not really around at that point yet in the late 70s, right? And so you would hear a song on the radio and you'd be like, I need to hear more by this band. I can't turn on MTV and see them. I can't download their music. I can't stream it. Like I'm going to go buy the whole record.
Yeah. I have a core memory of going on a road trip, and I'm assuming it would have been 81, summer of 81, and Urgent had just come out, and we were able to listen to it basically every hour, even though we were driving from Ohio to upper, like northern Wisconsin. Because as you went city to city, you would just flip to the next rock radio station and they would be playing Urgent, and you would go to the next city and they would be playing Urgent. And like, it was just like the summer of Urgent. Like you just heard it constantly, no matter where you went.
Yeah. It also doesn't hurt, I think, that Mick Jones and Jan Wenner were good friends. And so again, I'm a little too young to remember this, but I'm guessing that, you know, they had some Rolling Stone backing and that kind of stuff when Jan Wenner's sort of the biggest name in taste making. You know, he was an influencer who was in Rolling Stone. It doesn't hurt when you're in a band and you're friends with him.
Yeah.
Guys, it's not over. For their fourth album, which is called Four, they went to #1 and sold 6 million copies. So we're over 20 million on the first 4 albums. You're averaging 5 million albums per album release of sales.
Just a little side note for those watching this, if anybody's watching this as opposed to listening. Behind me, I have those 4 albums you just talked about, and I bought them all for like $1 or $3, and that's exactly why, because there were so many copies of these records floating out there that now you can pick these up. You don't have to spend $20 for a used copy anywhere because they're readily available.
Yeah, I have the debut on vinyl for that reason. It was just so cheap, and I was like, I know all these songs. I need to hear them on vinyl.
But wait, facts. There's more.
Wait,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, this is a Mutt Lange production, #4. This is their first time working with Mutt Lange. Thomas Dolby plays synthesizers on this record. Of course, everybody knows Thomas Dolby. Hugh McCracken plays, I think he plays some slide guitar on this. Hugh McCracken is one of those guys who's like played with a billion musicians. He's played with Dolly Parton, Carly Simon, and he's played on multiple Foreigner albums. Just if you look at it, like Donald Fagen and Yoko Ono and BB King, and I think at one point he was the touring bass player in Bon Jovi. I want to say he replaced Elk John Such. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think that's Hugh McDonald.
Oh, different Hugh. Got it. I mean, this guy played with Bob Dylan and Aretha Franklin, so studio musician, well respected, blah blah blah. So then you follow that up with records in 1982, which is a compilation. Of course, you've got 4 massive records in a row. You're going to put out a compilation at that point. Agent Provocateur came out in 1984. Again, you've got a top 5 hit. This went to #4. Only sold 3 million copies. So that's I think the lowest since the debut. But this is now like they're a global band. Like they're charting across the world, almost every major market. They're selling tons of records across the world. They're not just an American, UK sensation. They have, and again, you're getting like 4 or 5 singles per album. Then you have Inside Information in 1987. And this one went to 15 and only sold 1 million copies. So someone in the band's going, uh-oh. It's not working out, guys. What's going on? The people's tastes have changed. And the following year, Lou Gramm puts out a solo album. Trouble in Foreigner camp. And they would return in 1991 with Unusual Heat with a different lead singer. Drama. Johnny Edwards, who he was in a number of different bands. He sang. He's also, I guess, a guitar player as well. He sang in Montrose. King Cobra was another one, and there was a band called
Wild
Buster
Horse.
Brown he was in.
And so Buster Brown, members of Buster Brown would join Kingdom Come at some point.
Okay.
And then he had a band starting out right when he joined Foreigner called Wild Horses. I have a cassette of theirs. And
I have
James,
that on CD.
You know what? I definitely have it on cassette. James Kotak from Kingdom Come is the drummer, and Rick Steer is the guitar player. And those guys both came from Kingdom Come. And I think Atlantic put out the Wild Horses. Some label, they were on a major label, and Johnny got the call to audition for Foreigner, and he is. I've read some articles with him, and he is like, I've been busting my ass for years trying to make it, and now I've got a band, and like I really don't want to join Foreigner. Like I'd really actually rather stick with my band, but I also know that the paycheck might be good. I read something. Actually, a friend of the show, Matt Wardlaw, did a story for ultimateclassicrock.com about Unusual Heat, and yeah, I think it took quite a bit of convincing to get Johnny in the band. I think I read that that's when Mick Jones flew in Jan Wenner's personal jet to pick him up and fly him out to L.A. to ask him to join the band, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Huh.
Well, he only made it for one album, and that one album made it to 117 on the Billboard.
And that Wild Horses album was 90.
I think
Right.
so.
I remember it got a lot. It got a lot of heat initially. Like, oh, this is coming out as former members of Kingdom Come and this new band, and yeah, Atlantic was putting some money behind it, so I bet he was feeling pretty good initially.
Yeah.
I mean, it went nowhere. I don't even remember seeing any videos or anything. It was mostly like in magazines and pre-release hype.
Yeah, but if we talk about Montrose and King Cobra, right? Like John Edwards seems to be one of those guys that is a dependable call as a replacement singer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
He's the Ryan Fitzpatrick of singers.
Yes.
You bring him in,
Yes.
he kills it for like one game.
He's the Fitz dog of rock and roll.
He's the Fitz dog, and then the next game he throws 5 interceptions, and you're like, okay, let's we made a mistake there.
Yes.
But for one game, it was awesome.
But for one game, exactly. It's all you need is Fitz dog to throw a couple bombs.
Yeah.
So this album was a commercial failure. Like I said, it made to 117, which was the first time an album of theirs did not make the top 20, which is kind of crazy. On your 7th album, you're like, okay, finally we don't make the top 20. Like that's pop level charts. I mean, that's the same level of like Madonna and Michael Jackson and like just always being in the top 20 of the chart.
Now we'll talk about this record coming up very shortly, I'm sure. But one thing Mick Jones said, and I think he's right, is that SoundScan was introduced at some point during all this, and the way that records sold got counted changed dramatically. So he was saying that, in the 70s and 80s, it was based on records shipped to stores. It didn't necessarily mean that people bought them. It was how much they shipped out. And so a label that wanted to score a big top 10 album would ship millions and millions and millions of copies. Didn't mean that they were all being sold.
Yeah.
SoundScan was based on register sales, right? And so I think we'll talk about Unusual Heat's deficiencies, maybe, but they probably didn't stand a chance anyway.
Mm-hmm. I bet the 87 album in terms of sales is a very different story than, I don't know any songs from that album. I don't remember it, so I bet it didn't. It looks like it sold better than it actually did.
Yeah.
And then their 94 album, in which they reunited with Lou Gramm, only made it to number 136 in the US. So in the 90s, they did not make it into the top 20 on the 2 records that they released. And then from there was a long break of 14 years. And then you got Can't Slow Down. This is with Kelly Hansen as a singer and Jeff Pilson on bass. And again, this is, I mean, it's a weird time now, 2009, in terms of charts and stuff like that. So this went to number 12 on the US top rock albums chart.
I believe, I don't know if you're going to say this, sorry if you are, but I believe this might have been like a Walmart exclusive.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so Walmart got into exclusive album selling. I think they did the Eagles and maybe Journey.
Yes,
And
you're right. Yeah.
Walmart became one of the top music sellers during the download era, because you're drawing people into the stores. You're selling albums for a little bit lower price. People are in there buying their milk and their blue jeans. And oh, hey, Foreigner, I recognize that band name. And so I think Walmart, like for a couple of years, was like the top retail store for album sale, CD sales, just because of the download era.
Do you know who co-produced their final record? This is not a name you would associate with these bands, this era. To be fair, I don't think he was even alive during. I guess he was he was a young boy when this. Well, not this album, but when Foreigner started. Mark Ronson.
Okay, I was going to guess that.
Who's Mick Jones' stepson?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
I think Mark's mother married Mick when Mark was, I think I read 8 years old. So
got it. So it did sell, because of that Walmart exclusive, it sold 500,000 copies in the US.
I've never heard a song off that album.
I've never yeah. So they also did the thing where they like put an album of remixed hits as a bonus disc, and then they also included a DVD of live songs. So they packed that thing with.
I bought the Walmart the Journey album that came out with that Ariel Pineda as a singer, and they did the same thing. It was like a 3 CD box set of a new album, I think like the greatest hits re-recorded, and I think there was a DVD as well. It was a package. It wasn't just like a single CD.
That makes sense. If you're selling these at Walmart, it makes sense. You kind of like pack it with some classic stuff, and you feel like you're getting a cool,
And you charge $14 for a 3 CD set. And again, people are like, I get to hear the hits. I get to hear new music. Right. Oh, and I get to watch it on my DVD player when I get home. So
I'm not going to go through all the band members because there have been a lot.
Just of note of the band members, Jeff Pilson is the longest standing member, because Mick Jones, for medical issues, is really not in the band anymore. I think he might play once in a while, but not very often. He's definitely not a touring member. Jeff Pilson joined in 2003, which makes him the longest standing. And for those, hopefully if you're listening to this, you know, but Jeff Pilson is Dawkins' bass player as well. So Foreigner is not actually he doesn't play in Dawkins anymore. So Foreigner is his thing now, but he's carrying forth the legacy.
Considered the musical director, right?
Yeah.
Sort of in charge of the band in some ways, musically.
And Kelly Hansen was in a band called Hurricane that maybe someday we'll get to on the 80s metal podcast. Hurricane was a band that had two brothers, two guys who were brothers of the two guys in Quiet Riot. So Tony Cavazzo and Robert Sarzo were in Hurricane, and their brothers Carlos Cavazzo and Rudy Sarzo were in Quiet Riot.
Learned about them because they put out a new record not long ago.
Yeah,
maybe a year or two ago. So like I said, a lot of people have been through this band. Like people that you're you're like, wait, what? Jennifer Holliday, for example, who was in the performance of Dreamgirls on Broadway. She was in the band as like a backup singer for a couple years. That's wild to me. As you mentioned, you get some various interesting people. Dwayne Eddy, the famous like 1950s rock and roller, he was in the band for a brief period of time in the 90s.
Did he play live with them? I think he played a guitar solo on Mr. Moonlight, but I'm not sure that he actually played shows with them.
Or maybe he just played maybe he just played in the studio. But there are a lot of names that pop up, and you're like, really, that guy?
Jason Bonham played drums.
Mm-hmm. Um,
Oh, that's right. He was the touring drummer for
in
a while, right?
In the 2003. So basically, Lou Gramm left at the end of the 90s, early 2000s. I think there was like a breakup. He left, and Mick Jones was like, "All right, I'm putting this thing, Foreigner version 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever version it is. I'm starting from scratch," and got Jeff Pilson involved. Jason Bonham was the drummer. A guy named Chaz West was the singer. I think they just did a tour. They didn't do any albums. Chaz West is another guy, just like Johnny Edwards said, is played with a lot of the 80s guys. He's been in bands with guys from Dio's band and other bands that I can't remember offhand. But and then they got Kelly Hansen and also so today Foreigner is still touring, and we might get to that at the end. But Kelly Hansen has said that he is retiring and or retired. So now they're on a new singer who's replacing Kelly Hansen.
Wow.
Yeah,
I got more to say about that later, but
not only do you have like former members of Dokken and stuff, in 2021, Tom Gimbel retired, who I'm guessing he was like guitar and bass. He was replaced by a gentleman named Louis Maldonado, not related to Candy Maldonado, as far as I know.
but who I think is the lead singer now.
But he was in Train. Like, they're pulling bands from the 2000s or band members. Like, we're the DeLeo brothers. Get them in this. What are they up to? Seriously. A lot of people. So Foreigner essentially is like the songs of Foreigner at this point. There's not much left of the of any sort of original connection, except for Mick Jones being there, kind of gracing it with his approval.
I mean, I guess he's orchestrating the business of it, I would think.
Mhm.
But that's probably it. Cashing the checks.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's 80 years old. He's allowed to take a break. I hope and pray that having 2 decades worth of top 20 albums means he can retire comfortably. Like, unless they had an incredibly bad deal with their record label, I would imagine that those multiple millions of albums in constant rotation on classic rock radio.
Yeah, I'm sure he's fine.
So just I didn't want to say this without doing my research. Mick Jones in February 2024 revealed that he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he's had it for years, citing that as the reason why he was not touring starting in 2023. So dealing with medical issues. Also of note, Lou Gramm is popping up and doing a couple songs with the band. I'm not sure I don't think he's doing it every night on their tour, but he recently has been popping up, and that was, I don't think it was a secret. I think it was planned that he was going to do that. So he does 2 or 3 songs with them on some recent tour dates. So
okay, well, we're going to do 3 things here. We're going to look at the greatest hits that came out in 2002. It's called Complete Greatest Hits, and it really covers everything from the beginning of the band up until the 90s, which is what we want. And then we're going to talk about the 2 records in a separate section, Unusual Heat and Mr. Moonlight. And then we will get into our final reckoning with this band, in which we will determine if, like we did with Styx and Billy Squier, we'll determine if they thrived and they reached a new creative peak and found fresh energy to stay on top, whether they adapted, they stayed afloat with some solid work but couldn't recapture their glory, or they died. They lost their creative spark and became reliant on past successes. We had a vote at Patreon. Our Patreon members voted for which one of those 3 options they thought Foreigner fell, and we will share those results along with our own at the end of this episode. But let's go to the first round, gentlemen. Let's talk about the greatest hits. Complete Greatest Hits 2002. Just off the, I don't know if you kept notes or something like that, but there's 20 songs on here. Now, one of them is one of those things where they add a song to the greatest hits. which is Soul Doctor, which was on their 92 greatest hits. And then they added it to this one as well. So 19 of these songs were on albums. Of those, how many do you think you knew, like from opening riff or first chorus? You were like, oh, I know this song of the 19. Jay, how many? Just a guess.
Looking at my notes here, I think Headknocker was, I mean, I have that record, but it didn't hit me right away.
Headknocker! Headknocker! You're coming on strong! A real showstopper! A headknocker! He might not defend! Oh, but boy, does he love to play! He's got an old Fender Strat placed behind his back while he sings out Louie Louie. He's a backseat mauler, a barroom brawler. I think he's gonna blacken your eye. That goatee.
There were a couple others like Head Turns to Stone and Girl on the Moon that I didn't recognize, but those might be new songs too. So I would say probably, would you say 20? I would say 17.
Yeah.
I knew.
Chip, what about you?
Yep, same boat. I did not know Headknocker. I did not know Women, and then I did not know Girl on the Moon. But you know, like Jay mentioned, these songs were so inescapable to me growing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a couple years older than you guys, and just like radio, I never owned a Foreigner album. No, I take that back. We had the Records cassette. Records, as Tim mentioned, was like their greatest hits at that time. So we had that cassette and listened to it all the time. But
Which is funny because that came out in like early 80s, right?
yeah. I mean, I honestly
their first
like.
greatest hits came out.
So I got
early
double,
80s.
I got Double Vision on vinyl at a record sale. I got it for $1. I honestly, I don't know that I've ever like when I bought that, I was like, this looks like a weird, it's not a great cover.
Yeah, it's
And
weird looking over.
And I thought it was like some sort of weird compilation album. Like I didn't know, I don't think I had ever seen that album cover until I bought it 10 years ago. So Records was one that like, I know that cover. It looks like a jukebox. But like so many of the bands that we've talked about or we'll talk about, Styx, Journey, Foreigner, the Eagles, like my family didn't own many of those albums at all, but yet I've heard 17 out of the 20 songs on this.
Yeah, same here. And this is, I know we knew a lot of the Styx stuff. This is like another level, right? I think Styx was probably at 10 to 12 songs, but
Yeah.
not 17, 18.
Yeah.
That's an insane amount of material in a short amount of time to be that familiar with and not own any of the albums.
What about you, Tim?
So same with you guys. Headknocker, Woman, Girl on the Moon, and Heart Turns to Stone were the 4 album tracks that I didn't know, plus the Soul Doctor bonus track that's from the previous greatest hits. But every one of these I was like, oh dang, this I forgot this was Foreigner. Like when the beginning of Blue Morning Blue Day starts, I was like, this is Foreigner? I thought maybe this was a Supertramp song or Chicago or something like that when that first riff starts.
Out in the street, it's 6 a.m. Another sleepless night. 3 cups of coffee, but I can't clear my head from what went down last night. I know we both have our own little ways, but somehow we keep it together. You hear me talk, but you don't hear what I say. I guess it don't even matter.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is Foreigner. Holy crap. This is all Foreigner. Like you said, like it's wild how many songs. Like every album has about, I don't know, 3 to 4 just killer singles up until Agent Provocateur, and then inside information you get there's only like 2 or 3. There's 3 singles, but there's 2 that I guess I Don't Want to Live Without You and Say You Will. And when I saw those titles, I was like, do I know those? And then as soon as they started, I'm like, I know this song. Yeah.
I just got to say, like, I Don't Want to Live Without You. Journey's got a song. I think it's Journey or Steve Perry, Foolish Heart. Those are so, the best word I can think of is schmaltzy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I Don't Want to Live Without You is like so cheesy, elevator, dentist chair rock. Like it's soft, ballady, AOR stuff. And I love those songs.
It's the scene in the movie in the 80s where it's like a montage of a date that's going really well, and then they're going back to the New York apartment. There's the skyline in the background. He's got a tumbler and he's shaking up a martini,
and that's the thing is like that song does that to me too. I picture it as walking in Sears on an escalator at Great Northern Mall, and like that's what's playing over as you're going through like the perfume section and you're smelling all the samples. Like it's just so cheesy and it's so of the 80s and it's so perfect.
Yes, absolutely. I didn't even check. I should probably check. I'm pretty sure Foreigner made it into the Power Ballad book. 110. I'm guessing that's going to be which one would that be though? That's a good question.
I Want to Know What Love Is. I mean, that was a huge, like, so for like a teenager, right? Like a lot of these songs on this before Agent Provocateur came out on albums that like I was too young to be buying my own stuff, but like I Want to Know What Love Is was sort of like my introduction to like, this is Foreigner of my time, and I can go out and buy this cassette. And I remember that song, at least in my head, being huge.
Yeah, so this song only gets by as a power ballad on a technicality, which because there's basically no guitar to this song.
Yeah,
but
there's no power.
There's no power, but there are some gang vocal, like there's some group vocals that happen, which can be substituted in certain circumstances for the power. So I literally said, on the spectrum of power ballads, this is definitely on the weaker end. However, if you call for the criteria section, power could be derived not from not one, but 2 possible sources, guitars or vocals. And I Want to Know What Love Is barely slips by on the ladder. That's called getting by on a technicality. So they got by on a technicality. It is a power ballad. It doesn't have much power.
I also want to share one of my earliest memories. The first band I ever met was White Lion. I may have talked about that before, but I remember being backstage with them because my friend's parents knew the people that owned the Fantasy Theater in Cleveland. And I remember somebody in the band singing the chorus of Foreigner's I Want to Know What Love Is. But he was singing, instead of I Want You to Show Me, he was singing I Want You to Blow Me. And like that is a core memory. Like I don't remember which guy in White Lion was doing it. I don't think it was Mike Tramp. It might have been the drummer, but I just remember I have such a distinct memory of being backstage and him just singing that and like, oh yeah, you could change words to this song.
Wait a minute.
So clever.
That's how Weird Al Yank does it. He does it. He just thinks of a different word. And then you went down a rabbit hole of parody songs.
Yes.
Adult parody songs.
I also, just for the record, I knew Soul Doctor only because in my cheap CD buying obsession that I have since hopefully given up, there whenever I can find like a $1 CD somewhere, and even though I don't think I had records on CD, I think this was I found that Greatest Hits album that had 3, like you mentioned, 3 tracks added on. For $1 to throw in my car to have Foreigner's Greatest Hits, even though I probably owned Foreigner CDs that I could also throw in. Like I'm always a sucker for a Greatest Hits album, and I remember Soul Doctor being one of the songs that I liked. I'll get into this a little bit later too, but I interviewed Lou Gramm in 2016, and I'd forgotten that I actually talked to him about that song. And he just said it was a leftover, and they figured if they're going to package some stuff together, they had a couple songs that had not made it onto any records, and they might as well throw them out there.
Interesting. So, I mean, in terms of worthy greatest hits, this has got to be up there. It's just packed with greatest hits.
Sorry, one more thing too is those first 4 albums came out in 77, 78, 79, and 81.
Mm-hmm.
Like they cranked out 20 million album sales and half a dozen, or probably between those 4 albums.
Yeah, it's about 20 million.
About 12 to 14 hits.
Yeah.
Over the course of 5 years.
Yeah.
That's Van Halen level.
Yeah.
Most bands take that long between records.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is an insane number of hits in just a short period of time.
I think there was a lot of those bands in that era, 70s and 80s, it was pretty standard. Like Kiss was releasing a new album every year and touring.
Yeah.
It was just a continual job. You write, you record, you tour. While you're touring, you write 10 more songs. As soon as you get off tour, you record, you get back on the road, and it's just this.
Yeah. Yeah, Van Halen did that, and a lot of bands did it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is a successful greatest hits that Foreigner has. I mean, obviously they have more than one, they have multiple, but I feel like this one is especially just really captures their prime era of the band. And you're not getting, like you mentioned, like the 92, the very best, has like, it starts out with 3 new songs.
Yeah.
That to me is not how you don't know. You go in mostly chronological order is the way I want a greatest hits. I don't want things out of order. Like, show me the band's progression. And the thing that I think really came into light in comparison when we're going to talk about the 90s albums is how friggin' good they were with hooks.
Yeah.
Like Urgent and Hot Blooded and Double Vision and Head Games and
Juke Box Hero.
I mean, just catchy as hell. 3.5 to 4 minute long songs, like every single time, and always coming up with, Urgent's got that cool delayed guitar thing that happens. It's not like overly complicated, but it's just enough of a unique sound so you're not just hearing like a strummed guitar.
That was my takeaway on the greatest hits, was just kind of listening to it all together. They perfected the combination of like keyboards and guitar in a way that, the keyboards make this material very accessible. Obviously the songwriting is great, but like in terms of presentation, like there's these keyboards that make the songs kind of easier to get into, change the moods a bit, but the guitar is edgy. There's a lot of really cool guitar stuff on here, and the overall energy of the band is like dynamic and edgy too. So that sweet spot of those first 4 records, they're just able to present the material that's super hooky in a way that's also very, radio friendly, easy for lots of different people to get into, including, people who want to rock. Like it never goes so far, I think, on those first 4 records where it turns into like the 87 stuff where it's just mall music. like they never quite, even like I Want to Know What Love Is, like there's some dark keyboard stuff on there that sounds like early Phil Collins. It's got this ominous kind of feel to it until you get to the big chorus. Even then they were still finding this really cool middle ground of accessible but a little edgy.
So I think Lou Gramm was not a huge fan of that direction of synthesizer related stuff. And that's what sort of led to him leaving, doing some solo. I don't think the solo albums were an intent to leave the band. I think he was just trying to be creative in ways that he wasn't being creatively satisfied in Foreigner anymore. But he has said, he wrote a book that I read before I interviewed him, and he has said that while those solo records, they did okay, they didn't do great, the label still really wanted more Foreigner music. And so they didn't necessarily give him all the backing and push that they would have had the band broken up and he had been a solo artist. They were still kind of, they were like, you go have your fun, but we need you back in this band. I pulled a quote from, and then he also formed a band called Shadow King, which had Vivian Campbell from Def Leppard and
That's
Dio on
right.
guitar. And he said that one was his chance to go back and do some rock stuff. And he said that's when Atlantic really put the pressure on and said, we're not promoting this record at all. Shadow King played one live show, I think in London. And then Vivian Campbell got the call to join Def Leppard, and Lou Gramm said that the label basically came to him and said, yeah, we're not doing any more support, so go back to Foreigner. But in the 2016 interview, I pulled this quote, and he said, it got to the point where I knew that I didn't want to be in a band that just relied on synthesizers. I was so shocked we had taken a turn like that. I didn't know if it was going to be a mistake, but I knew that our loyal rock fans were going to be disappointed to the point where we would lose a good portion of our audience, and we did. So
Mm-hmm.
in essence, that sort of, for Lou, that sort of ruined the band for him. Is that direction?
It's also, once you cross, there's a line there that I think they were walking for a long time. They like just right on it and they go up to it and they come back. And then once you cross over it, it's really hard to come back. It's hard to get your credibility back when you go that soft.
I just want to mention that before we move on to the 90s albums, Double Vision, which is one of my favorite Foreigner songs. That song was inspired by a hockey game between the New York Rangers, of whom Lou Gramm was a season ticket holder in 1977, and the Buffalo Sabres. And apparently there had been some roughness to the head. Like, oh, he got slapped around the face. He's going to have double vision after. And Lou Gramm heard that and was like, huh, that's an interesting phrase, double vision. And that's where that song comes from. He heard the Rangers announcers talking about the action during the game and thought that was a cool phrase. So the Buffalo Sabres have something to do with the success of Foreigner. I also just love the keyboard in the chorus of that song. That din, 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 din. It's like a minor sound, which is weird for the chorus. Like usually you're minor and then the chorus goes into a major and becomes like big and bright. But they do the opposite thing. The verses are like these, these very riffs. And then you get that really weird keyboard part. That's just a little bit more interesting than I think a more basic band would do.
Yeah. Feeling down and dirty, feeling kind of mean. I've been from one to another extreme. This time I had a good time, ain't got time to wait. I wanna stick around till I can't see straight. Fill my eyes with that double vision. No disguise for that double vision. Ooh, when it gets through to me.
That's what I'm saying. Like the way they use keyboards in the band early on is they're always a twist. Like, oh, we're going in this direction. I didn't expect that, or the mood just changed because this weird keyboard tone came in, or this,
If the mid 80s Foreigner was mall rock, then the late 70s stuff had to have been like the Dazed and Confused, Camaro, jean shorts, smoking cigarettes in the summer kind of rock. It just had that. It was just good, powerful rock with catchy hooks and.
Yep. All right, let's get into the two 90s records and run through them a little bit. So as mentioned, in 91, Lou Gramm's out of the band. He's doing his own thing. They bring in Johnny Edwards, as we talked about earlier, and they work with Terry Thomas, who had been he was in a lot of bands, and I want to say
he had worked with Bad Company.
Okay.
When Bad Company lost Paul Rodgers, and I think that was part of the appeal. Mick Jones helped Bad Company find Brian Howe, who took over for Paul Rodgers, and so I think those two bands had there was some intersection between those two bands, just with behind the scenes kind of stuff and that kind of stuff.
So, and as mentioned, this did not do well commercially. Just overall, what works for you guys on Unusual Heat? Jay, I'll start with you.
Let's see what works. This is a tough one. You hear, yeah, so I didn't get into it in the listen to the greatest hits. You hear some Queen stuff that I had never really heard before. There's some guitar parts and keyboard parts and like chord changes and things that I was like, oh shit, they sound like 70s Queen. Oddly, on this record, there's a song, Moment of Truth, and a couple other moments where the choruses sound like 80s Queen. I was like, oh damn, that sounds like that could have been, off of one of Queen's final records.
Like Hot Space.
And the way they're doing the harmonies, which I thought was kind of cool.
And this heart of mine has only had one owner, but you can change that if you try, babe. Now I don't wanna love forever, and I don't need a master plan. I just wanna come together, and I want you to understand it's the moment of truth. It's finally come this time. Now we've struck the line. The moment of truth. This time it's everything. Open up, let me in. Let me right into your heart. Oh, yeah.
You're getting a lot of pop metal adjacent sounding stuff here, which can show some of the 70s like Zeppelin-ish kind of influence on the band, which works okay. I think the vocals are, they're good. There's nothing like on here where you're going to say, oh, that's, this is the wrong singer, or man, do I miss Lou Gramm. Unless you beat him, and I think then you would say like, oh, I get why Lou Gramm is so special, but there's nothing on this is like, this feels totally out of left field, or it feels like a 91 rock record. There's a lot of albums released at this time that kind of sound like this. So I guess, there's nothing outside of them reaching or trying to do something that's ridiculous. So, I think that's the best I can say about it. How about you, Chip?
Yeah, so a couple things before I talk about that. I actually asked ChatGPT to tell me a list of bands from the 70s and 80s that in the 90s switched lead singers, because I was interested to see if this was a common thing. In my mind, it is sort of common, but all these bands, again, spanning the entire 90s. So some of these were like late 90s, but Van Halen, Gary Cherone joined the band.
Mm-hmm.
Genesis had a guy named Ray Wilson become their lead singer. NXS had a new singer whose name I don't know. Yes, changed singers. Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Styx, and Journey all had so all these bands from the 70s and 80s hit the 90s, and all were either their singers had delusions of grandeur and like, I'm going to be a solo artist now, or something wasn't working. Jay, you mentioned earlier, labels were saying, you guys aren't cool anymore, we're dropping you, and they had to figure out how to get on. So it was not uncommon for some of these huge 70s and 80s bands to switch singers. The other thing I wanted to call out was Terry Thomas. I read this quote. He said, they asked me to produce a record, and I actually quit 3 times. Johnny Edwards was a fantastic singer, but he's not Lou Gramm. If you're going to replace a singer, you have to be like Journey. You have to put in someone who sounds like Steve Perry. So they needed someone to sound like Lou Gramm. I didn't want to do the record. I just didn't want to do it. When they said, we want you to do this, I said, if you haven't got Lou Gramm, it's not Foreigner. And yet he still did the record. So eventually he was talked into it, but like he knew that this was not what the fans would want from a Foreigner record. To that point, I think it sounds good. I'm glad I found this on CD after my Little Hunt, because again, I had never heard it. I didn't remember there being any hits off of it. I don't, man, I don't know. I don't know if they would have been better off losing the Foreigner name and calling it something different.
Mm.
The way Stone Temple Pilots called their new band Talk Show after
Mm-hmm.
Talk Show didn't do very well sales wise, so it might not have been a good move. But Foreigner, by this point in time, when this album came out in '91, they were competing against, not competing. They were. I put them as sort of hard rock, hair metal adjacent. They weren't doing anything that was super
Mm-hmm.
unique. They sounded. They were, I wrote down this list of bands that they were in the same category as. None of which had huge hits, but Alias, Giant, House of Lords, Company of Wolves, Bad English with John Waite, Hardline with Neil Schon, and
Mm-hmm.
even a little Winger. Like they didn't quite fit into the hair metal stuff, but they weren't. I don't know. So there wasn't a ton that was like to me unique. It sounded, to your point, Jay. It sounded like a '91 rock album. But
Yeah.
there wasn't. I don't know if you guys watched I again '91. I'm not paying attention to Foreigner at all. They had a video for Lowdown and Dirty. Did you guys watch that?
Checked out a second of it.
Like super generic, like super
Mhm.
soundstage, like
Mm-hmm.
what the bands were doing. Like you didn't like if I had turned on MTV and it didn't say the name of the band, I would not have known it was Foreigner.
Yeah.
Johnny Edwards at one point is wearing like a open. His shirt is open. It's unbuttoned. He's got like like a collared. I'd venture to call it a blouse kind of shirt, right?
Yeah.
And then he's wearing like
that was
tight-
big in '91. Yeah.
and then he's wearing like tight shorts and like boots. Like it but it felt very much of 19 like that was
Yeah.
was a look in 1991.
Mhm.
The second long weekend, these liberties you taken and got in. Oh yeah. And this distance you've been keeping grows wider every day. Time is running out. There's nothing left to say. Oh Lord. Innocent child, that's what I once believed. But now I know better, and I ain't gonna let you play that game with me. I'm telling you, mama, I'm gonna get low down and dirty, run wild in the night. Low down and dirty, this time I'll do it right. Loving every minute, making up for lost time.
But it was too generic. Like that song sounded generic. It didn't sound like Foreigner.
Mhm.
I think it's okay. Like I'm glad I listened to it. I'm glad I sought it out and eventually listened to it. My very first impression of it was like exactly what the producer said. Like this is not Lou Graham. I'm not really that interested. But the more I listened to it, the more I liked it. I don't love it. But there are some. You said Queen for Moment of Truth. I thought some of the vocals sounded a little bit like Robin McCauley. A little bit. It had a little bit Macaulay Schenker group.
Yep.
And I think Mountain of Love at times balance some of that older Foreigner sound with the new stuff. But it's a long album. It's a long album.
Yeah.
Like I didn't need 51 minutes of new Foreigner with a different singer.
No. I thought some of the tracks had some potential, like Lowdown and Dirty had a vibe to it that I enjoyed. But I think the thing that's missing is what I mentioned is like just those like short, catchy ideas. Urgent, Jukebox Hero, Head Game. Like these are all sort of like generic song titles. Moment of Truth,
Yeah.
Ready for the Rain, When the Night Comes. Like these aren't really saying anything other
Mhm.
than we put together the most generic sort of songs we could that sound like Foreigner. Even though I actually thought like some of the stuff reminded me, and I don't know if you guys picked up on this record, and then also going to the next record, there was like some Zeppelin-esque drumming happening, like Bonham-esque drumming, like that big like boom,
Mhm.
boom, like that big stomp thing happening, and the guitar playing also reminded me of I don't know, like I know Mick Jones has been around for a long time, and at this point he's pretty well regarded, but I don't know, is he like one of those guys that's in the magazines, like the guitar magazines, as being a hero? Because
No.
his stuff
No.
sounds super competent and good, but there's never anything where I go like, that's incredible.
No. Yeah. No. I always saw him more in context as a songwriter. I mean, he he's a co-producer or producer on Van Halen's 5150.
I was going to bring that up because that's interesting because I think there is Van Halen purists that would argue that that is a far departure from any Van Halen sounds, right? It uses keyboards and stuff, and knowing that around that same time Mick Jones was writing like this stuff, like I Want to Know What Love Is and Say You Will, that yeah. Let me just show you. This is the I don't know if you'll be able to see this, the back CD jacket, but even the look,
yeah,
like even that is super. Like if you showed me this picture, you'd be like, "What band is this?" I can't tell you who this is. This does not look like. Not that Foreigner had an easily identifiable look, but like I don't recognize. Like this doesn't look like this. Looks like Wild Horses, honestly.
Yep. Yeah, it's any like during that transitional period before alternative music breaks, and sort of the bands from the 80s knew that they had to lose some of the glam, and you had this 1 or 2 year period where like they look like that, like denim shirts, and started to wear shorts and boots, and like there'd be one guy in the band that wore like blousey shirts. It was just like this.
One guy had like a longer leather jacket.
They were trying to they would try to dress it down but still look tough and still look like a band, So that photo looks like any of those bands.
Go ahead.
Well, the two things that stood out to me on this record. One, you can hear it. We talked about how cool the keyboards are in the early Foreigner material. They were just like typical like synth layering. You lose all of that really unique tones and mix up a piano and an organ, all the early stuff. You got all these different tones. It brought moods. It brought like different shades, and it would pop in and out and like be a featured character in the songs. And on this stuff, it's like, oh, well, we just got to layer in some more synths. So you lose all that magic. And I think the other magic you're losing, I mean, outside of the songwriting, but the drums are just so generic arena rock. I think the real Foreigner sound, there's a lot of personality in those drums. They sync up a lot with the keyboards. They sometimes lock up with the clavinet sounds and things that kind of bring a funky stomp and groove to the material. And here, I think, Tim, you mentioned Bonham. Yeah, it's like that like robotic version of Bonham played through a lot of reverb with no cool fills or dynamics, some of this stuff could be drum machines. I mean, quite honestly, I don't know for sure, but it's so bland from a rhythm drum standpoint that even if there's good material here, it's just not presented in a way that's exciting.
So this album, so I've been I scroll around a lot on Reddit, and there's a lot of like local restaurants that build up personalities. I don't know if I should name any of them. Hot Chicken Takeover being an example in Columbus, right? And a private equity firm bought them, and so people who used to be big, huge fans of Hot Chicken Takeover are now saying it's lost. Like you've lost a flavor. Like it's like now there's nothing special about it anymore. In fact, like the quality has gone down now that it's all about building up the brand and the franchise and making money. In a way, that's sort of like this, right? Like Foreigner had its flavor throughout the late 70s, early 80s, and then no private equity firm bought out Foreigner, but they changed some members and they just went for like all that stuff that made him special in the 70s and early 80s was gone by the time this album came around.
Yeah. Moment of Truth sounds like they were trying to write the montage song for Karate Kid 3.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this is the big fight where Daniel LaRusso takes on whatever his villain is in this one. It's the moment of truth.
Which is kind of what Queen was doing a lot of in the 80s too, right? Trying to write like soundtrack songs, and
you're just trying to write these epic, like this is the most important moment of your life song.
Right.
And like a song step up. And then you've got like I'll Fight for You, which like if that had come out like in 84, 85, that would have been like their intro into the not power ballad stuff, but like the I don't know what you call that kind of song, but the slower, like the
just a ballad.
Just passionate ballad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But by this point in time, it sounds
Well, I mean, we kind of cover what didn't work. The whole shebang in there. So
You just hear real lack of passion. I think that's my biggest
yes,
takeaway. Is like, oh wow, yeah.
it's not quite AI level, but it is pretty generic sounding.
But again, it's like nothing on this. You know, when we went into this series, I expected some of these records we would put on and say, "What the hell are they doing?" I never had that moment on this record. It was mostly like, okay, okay, and then you get to the end of it, and you're like, I mean, it's competent, professional, early '90s rock music.
Yeah, and,
You
and
know?
what's in it, what I was thinking is if they had done what you just said, like they could have swung towards like the melodic hair rock, right? Like they
Mhm.
they could have gone like we know we can get these guitar riffs. Now let's like amp up the choruses. Let's really like create these big
Mhm.
fist pumping songs, and they could have made that swing because, like, I think you could argue that a lot of the bands from the late '80s probably owned a Foreigner's Greatest Hits album.
Mhm.
I wouldn't call Foreigner a heavy metal band, but I'm sure they appeared in some of those hard rock magazines like Hit
Mhm.
Parader and Circus because there wasn't a ton of quote unquote heavy metal. It's like they were just a solid rock band. And I'm sure a lot of those bands were listening to Foreigner songs and
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Jeff Pilson didn't start listening to Foreigner when he joined the band in
no,
2003.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure he was familiar with the catalog.
So even if they had like in '91, I don't know who they toured with, um, but if they had taken out like LA Gun sounds nothing like them, but like I think if they had wanted to really remain relevant in the early '90s, they would have been like, let's do a package tour, and even to the point like it's okay if we get blown off the stage, but we're going to appeal to the LA Guns fans, the Skid Row fans, the Warrant fans by bringing them out and giving them some arena exposure.
Yeah,
That might have helped them a little bit.
Hardline was kind of like that, right? And
Yeah,
Alias, some of those bands were on those tours or were
yeah,
a little more closely related with the more, straight, you know, pop metal bands.
yeah.
Um, so Mr. Moonlight follows in 1994, and there is some changes to this. So Lou Gramm comes back, but longtime drummer who was a founding member, Dennis Elliott, had left the band prior to this. And there's actually an interesting story. Uh, in 1990, Mr. Elliott and his wife were aboard their yacht, the Charisma 3, and it caught fire and they had to be rescued by the Coast Guard. It's on his Wikipedia page. It's just interesting. He was in a band, so he was like a well-established musician when he joined Foreigner. He had been in the band If, which was one of those like bands I've seen their album covers around, but they were like a jazz fusion band
Mm.
throughout the 70s, and he played on like 5 albums in the 70s. And then he was also in the Roy Young band and he played a bunch of singles, I should say. He was in a band called Ferris Wheel. We had an album and a bunch of singles. He was in Ian Hunter's band. I think just prior to joining Foreigner. And then he did play on Mick Jones' 89 solo album. But he was gone in 93. And then also Rick Willis, who had been in the band, I think, for 15 years at this point. He was the second bass player, I guess. He was out of the band as well. So they brought in Bruce Turgeon, who had been in some other bands. I think he was in Shadow King
Yeah, he was.
and the Lou Gramm band. Which is how he ends up in the band with Mick. And then Mark Schulman was on drums and Bruce and Mark both sang backing vocals. So this album came out in '94 on same label that they've been putting stuff out on. It was produced by Mick and Lou
No, no,
along
no,
with
no, 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 no.
what?
It was not, and I think
Oh,
that was so they got dropped by Atlantic.
oh, that's right. Yes.
This came out on. It was like one of those like. There's a couple. I mean, I have the CD right here. There's a couple different labels. That my eyes are terrible. Uh, Gene Rama, Another one that I can't read because it's too small, and Priority Records. And Priority was like sort of like a rap label, I think.
Priority was the home of like gangster rap, like Easy E.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is kind of, I don't want to say how far they had fallen, but like Atlantic had no interest in putting anything else out by Foreigner, so they were really sort of scraping the barrel here, scraping the barrel, bottom of the barrel, trying to get somebody to put out a Foreigner record.
And they worked with Mike Stone, who had worked with Queen and April Wine and Asia and Journey and just White Snake. That was something that I heard a little bit on this record, was a little bit of White Snake-ness. I don't know if you guys picked it up, but like just in terms of the music, sometimes like Big Dog sounded like White Snake doing Zeppelin in the musical sense. I don't love his spoken thing that's happening in that song. I did want to mention this song is not streaming on Amazon Music, whereas Unusual Heat is. I don't know. Is this? I'm guessing
it's on Spotify.
It's on Spotify.
It's on Apple Music. Yeah.
That's weird. Why would this one not be on?
Jeff Bezos, man.
Does he have something against Arista? Because this is all the other stuff is on the streaming service. So what did you guys think of Mr. Moonlight and the return of Lou Gramm? Chip, I'll start with you this time since I started with Jay last time.
Yeah, so I did not know. So I knew Unusual Heat existed. I did not know this album existed. Honestly, until I had put in the interview request to do an interview with Lou Gramm in 2016, and it was approved. And then I'm like, I should probably do a little bit of studying. Like, what's he been up to since Foreigner and his solo records? And I'm like, they put out a record in 1994 that I didn't. I ordered it from Amazon. I got it for like $4. So it's a new-ish record to me. When I interviewed Lou, he did say, and I told him that. I said I was not familiar with this record. It kind of, and he said that, I think it's one of those things. Again, going back to sort of some of the stuff Patrick talked about a couple 80s metal episodes ago. Maybe for Lou, it was what was most current in his mind, because he said this is his favorite Foreigner record, which is interesting considering all the hits they had throughout the year. But
wow.
Yeah, I was, yeah, I'm surprised by that.
Is that because this is the one he did the most writing on?
Maybe.
Is it something weird like that?
Lou Gramm again is the voice of Foreigner. Yeah. So I did like this. I did like this record more than Unusual Heat. Yeah, I thought Big Dog, the guitars actually remind me of like a 70s Foreigner song. Mm-hmm. The vocals remind me like every once in a while, like ZZ Top will do a song like that where it's like a low, kind of a low register, more talking than sing kind of thing. It felt super weird to be on this record. I'm assuming that's Lou Gramm, but like I don't even know that that's Lou Gramm. He's not singing at all.
Yeah.
I did note that parts of it, not the whole song, but the song Real World reminds me a little bit of like Def Leppard, Too Late for Love. There's like a little guitar part that sort of reminds me of that. I Keep Hoping, I wrote, it's got sort of like I Want to Know What Love Is, backing vocals. So here's the thing. So I did not know this record existed until 2016-ish. It's not like it's regularly in my CD player. Like it's not like I didn't listen to it 3 weeks straight going into the interview with him. When I listened to it again this week, I'm like, I know that I was not listening to the radio in 1994. I was buying CDs. The song White Lie to me sounds like a radio hit. Like I felt that song sounded so familiar to me. Maybe it's just like the first couple times I listened to the CD, it just was one of those hooky songs that stuck with me. Like that song to me, again, sounds completely familiar. And also, Until the End of Time sounded really familiar. Like I'm like, those were definitely not radio hits. I don't know them from the radio, but like I feel like I know those songs.
Mm-hmm.
I think this album, like, so what I wrote, like, kind of bottom line is I think if this album had come out like in 84, 85, it would have fit that time period and may have done pretty well for them. I think by 1994, I sort of laughed that these guys were like mid 40s and they were like at that point ancient, you know, in terms of what was hot at the time in 94. You've got like Green Day and what Nirvana and like all these bands that are like super young guys, and these guys are old. Now I laugh about that because like I just realized that like the guys in Jimmy Eat World and Blink-182 are in their 50s, and I don't think of them as old because I'm a similar age to them. But
Right.
Foreigner in their 40s felt old. These guys felt really old to me at the time.
Yeah.
But I like this record. I like it more than Unusual Heat. I'm glad that Lou Gramm came back. Again, I did a little bit of just, I was curious as in 94 who they were touring with. And they did a support tour with the Doobie Brothers. And then they did a summer tour in the U.S. with REO Speedwagon and Peter Frampton. And that all makes sense. You know, these bands you package up bands that had hits in the 70s and 80s and put them in amphitheaters. And you probably do pretty well on the nostalgia tour crowd. I don't think they were breaking any ground in 94. And this sound was not very 1994-ish, so I'm not surprised that it you know didn't sell 1 million records. Yeah,
I'm mostly with you here. You know, out of the gate, this sounds more like Foreigner. You can hear they're going back to the formula either because of the people they brought in or a conscious decision. So like drum wise, you can tell this is a real drummer. You know, some of the feel is back that gets lost on Unusual Heat. It's now got a little character to it, locked up better with the bass. It's not just like, you know, big arena drums. Keyboards are being used better here. Not all the time, but you hear like the opening track, Under the Gun, they save the keyboards to the middle section and they pop in and it's this change of mood, right? And it's this cool little feel part. Then they exit. They're not just like always layering synths under every song. There's some of that going on here, but you can hear like the formula of classic formula or Foreigner is coming through. I think Big Dog is another example of that. That riff, very reminiscent of early Foreigner. Actually, that song reminds me of in total, it reminds me of a instrumental from an Ace Frehley album. Real World shows a little ambition. I can hear the Def Leppard comparison, but I can also hear like, oh, this is like them doing Juke Box Hero in 1994. I keep hoping? Yeah. Vintage guitar lead, you know, traditional rock ballad, but it's got some of those elements. Running the Risk, that sounds like a Foreigner chorus to me. So you and then obviously Lou Gramm's voice, right? I think has helped bringing all this together. Even material like Until the End of Time, maybe from a songwriting standpoint, isn't incredible, but it's a great vocal performance, which, you know, is worth listening to there. And I think the biggest or the most interesting thing about this record is you do hear them step into a different sound on this one. This is the one where I'm like, oh, okay, I can hear some 90s influence. So there is a mix of songs here that have a more of an acoustic guitar, jangly kind of feel. They even get a little folksy, like Jim Blossom-y, kind of Goo Goo Dolls-ish, Toad the Wet Sprocket or something. Like you can hear some of those types of bands come through. So Rain is a good example of one of those songs. I think White Lie is in that space.
One little white lie, one white you ever doubt me? You see the lock on the door of this heart. You hold the key. I need the trust you can give. Is it something that you keep from me? One little white lie.
All I need to know sounds like Mark Cohn's Walking in Memphis to me. So you're hearing like those don't feel like crazy steps for them to take, but they are different. Like they are them stepping into a new sound that feels expanding what Foreigner can be, you know. I'm not saying those are my favorite Foreigner songs, but it is an interesting like sign that they're like trying to expand their sound into something slightly different, but not so crazy. I mean, there's somebody rapping or something on these songs, right? It's like a little bit of a left turn, expanding what Foreigner can be that is distinct from the first four records. Like I don't think any of those songs you would hear on those albums, but they still sound like Foreigner because it's Lou Gramm and songwriting and melodies and things are all in the ballpark.
I feel like Big Dog is the most unusual song in the Foreigner catalog, and only because of the vocals. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's what makes it sound like, oh wait, this is not something I've heard. But it's not. They don't go overboard, and it's not like on 10 songs where he's talking or whatever.
Yeah, and musically, I think it's
Yeah, yeah.
They got the saxophone in there, which other Foreigner songs have featured, and the guitars and riffs and things are all in the ballpark. So yeah, there is some. There's two things going on that I think are good. One, there's some acknowledgement of like, this is what the Foreigner sound is, and we're going to do more of that. But there are some moments, like I said, with the jingler side or even the more ambitious stuff like Real World, of like exploring what the band can move on to, which I don't think Unusual Heat shows much of any. It just, Unusual Heat is just like, hey, we need to make an album. Let's get a bunch of professional musicians together and make it. This feels like, hey, what is Foreigner? What could Foreigner be? You know, where could we take this and still, you know, not alienate our fans? What'd you think, Tim?
Yeah, it definitely sounds more Foreigner, even if there are times where it's interesting. Like, it sounds more Foreigner, obviously, because you have Lou Gramm back and he has a distinct voice. I can't pinpoint what makes it distinct. It just is distinct. And pairing him with Mick Jones, there's just something there. But it did feel like, I mentioned like the Whitesnake thing, I did feel like there was just a slight something off about the record in terms of like, it didn't capture the classic Foreigner sound the way I wanted it to. And I think looking at the run times, every song is too long on this record. That's the thing I think is maybe missing, is like, where's the 3.5 minute song? All these songs are 4.5 to 5. There's a 6-minute song on here. Like, no Foreigner song needs to be 6.5 minutes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's too much fat on these songs in general. Every one of these could have 30 to 50 seconds trimmed off. And then you're looking at like a good runtime. This is exactly why CDs were bad for these bands, because they just were like, oh, we can noodle a little bit longer at the beginning, or we can make that bridge a little longer, or there's more opportunities for like, you know, extended verses and stuff. And it just does not do them well when they were so good at the very succinct 3.5 minute radio rock song. But you know, when you're not really looking at radio as being something that matters anymore, then you start essentially writing a bunch of all album tracks. So you don't have to necessarily, I mean, maybe there was some delusion that this is going to be their comeback record. And I don't know how you look at 94 and think Foreigner is going to fit into any radio market anywhere. I mean, even VH1 is not playing Foreigner. Their VH1 is just playing like Sheryl Crow. They're still playing modern music, but it's modern in the sense that it's the alternative, the lighter alternative, Toad the Wet Sprocket, and, you know, that kind of stuff. Whereas this is just not going to make it. Also, it should be noted, they recorded this at like 10 different studios, which is crazy.
Yeah.
they were all over the place recording and mixing and stuff. It does kind of sound that way. Whereas I don't know that there's a cohesion to this record in any way, shape, or form in the way that they just, I don't know, it feels piecemealed together a little bit. I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah.
There were some like alternate in terms of track list. There were alternate track list versions for Canada. They started with Under the Gun, which on the US version is the 10th song.
Oh, on Apple Music, it's the first song.
So interesting.
You're saying this is the Canadian track list then?
I don't know, because on Wikipedia it says that White Lie is your first track.
No.
Yeah. I mean, the CD Under the Gun's the first song.
So then there's and then it says under that US and Canadian editions, but I don't know when that came out, because it's also, they must have switched some songs around. I don't understand what's going on, because it's 4 minutes shorter with the same number of songs. How do you do that? How do you make that happen? I don't know. So this album like worked and didn't work. Like I didn't mind having it on because it sounded like Foreigner, but it just sounded like I was listening to all the album tracks from Foreigner as opposed to all the big hits.
Yeah. I think White Lie, I'm with you, Chip. Like that song sounds very familiar to me, and I don't know why.
And it doesn't. It's not like it sounds like another. It's not like, oh, that was a Matchbox 20 song that had the same.
No. It's more like I've heard this song somewhere. Was it in a TV show or something?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Music, music is a weird thing, because I'm thinking like Foreigner may have been better off just taking the 90s, like even keeping this record, but taking the 90s off, and then like doing the whole breakup reunion, and like 15 years after they broke up, like dropping this, and maybe people would have been more interested in this. But 15 years after they broke up would have been 2005. Nobody would have listened to this in 2005, right? You know what I mean? Like there was not a good time, but it would have been better if they had all gone and done their solo stuff and just taken some time off, rather than try to keep it going with Johnny Edwards. And then even with Lou Gramm coming back, they should have taken some space, I think. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, right? But
yeah, I mean, if they don't know at this point, like, hadn't they just put out the greatest? This might be a pattern that we're seeing. Like, they put out the complete greatest hits that sold well, then they bring Lou back. They put together this album.
But going back to those bands that swapped out singers, like Van Halen, Genesis, INXS, yes, Judas Priest. You could maybe argue that Judas Priest and Iron Maiden have put out more recent albums that are worthwhile, but like a lot of these bands, like their glory days are their greatest hits. And almost like these new records are for them to remain creative and a little bit of vanity. Whereas they know, like I looked up on Setlist FM, and I know that people weren't keeping Setlist back in the 90s necessarily the way they are today. But like the songs off these two records that we talked about only got played, like 2 or 3 songs from each album got played in the 90s, but then it was all greatest hits. Like if you go see Foreigner today, you're not going to hear anything but 17 of those 20 songs that we talked about earlier. They're not pulling anything off this album.
Sure. But it does sound like if you could go back to where they were at this point, this album sounds like some creative forces in the band saying like, where can we take this?
Yeah.
And will people care? We don't know, but like these are ideas that we have, like more so than the album before this, which felt like, hey, we got to put another record out, which isn't strange because you would think the album with the new singer would be an opportunity to reinvent yourself, which it felt the safest. And this one at least feels there's some, even the longer track times, to Tim's point. Yeah, I agree. Foreigner songs shouldn't be this long, but I can also see that as like, hey, we're trying some different stuff and we're trying to figure out who we are now. And I can make that story, make sense for what they were thinking here.
94 would have been way too late in the history of music for this, but like maybe what would have served him well on this record is to do Lou Gramm, Mick Jones as the songwriters, and then go out and get do like Whitesnake did in '87, right? Go out and find, get Josh Freese to play drums on this Foreigner record. Get who would have been you know what I mean? Like fill this band full of people that, like when you saw a Foreigner video on VH1 in '94, you would have been like, wait a minute, isn't that the guitar player from I can't think of '94 band, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they should have made this like an all-star lineup band, and to bring more attention to it, I think, because that worked for Whitesnake in '87, even though like Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge didn't play on that '87 record. By watching that video, all of a sudden it's an all-star band. Like '94, if you had Jason Bonham and Jeff Pilson, and again, those names aren't moving any records in '94, but at least they're recognizable. Like they've joined forces with Foreigner. The almighty Foreigner now has Jason Bonham and Jeff Pilson in this band. All of a sudden, they become you get a little bit more attention, I think.
It might be interesting. I know we didn't listen to was it the 2009 album with Kelly Hansen?
Yeah.
I would want to compare that to this.
Yeah.
And like, which of those is fan service? Which of them is actually like creatively inspired in any way? You know, that might be a better comparison than this versus the rest of their catalog.
Yeah.
This meaning Mr. Moonlight.
Well, gentlemen, I think now would be a good time to discuss round 3, which is our did they thrive, did they adapt, or did they die? We'll share their poll results from our community in just a moment, but where do you land? Thrive, adapt, or die in the 90s? Foreigner. Jay?
I'm going with adapt. Here's my case. So, again, this is a band that starts to fall out of favor before the 90s. They take, 4 years to put out a new record. So we talked about how quickly they delivered, from 77 to 81, just a murder's row of hit songs and albums. Between 87 and 91, they do nothing. And 87 is, there's a ballad or two on there that are big hits, but, it's not selling as well. So they're already on the way down, which I think was the story with Styx. So the 90s itself, I don't think had anything to do with that. It's like they had internal problems. Lou Gramm is leaving. He's doing solo albums. Like creatively, they're running out of ideas, don't have an identity. That had nothing to do with what was going on in the larger music scene. They try to replace him. They sort of deliver on an uninspired record in 91 that sounds like, like we talked about, a standard hard rock record. They come back. I think they take some good inspiration from what's going on in the 90s, and they put together, this Mr. Moonlight record, which I think is could have been a step in the right direction. To your point, Chip, maybe they release this, but then they take some time. Or they do the Bon Jovi thing and they just keep pushing through and try to reinvent themselves through the 90s. I think what's missing from this story that we haven't talked about is Lou Gramm gets diagnosed with a brain tumor in 97. And he's not able to really perform for a long time in the same way that he had been. So that probably had as much to do with how they exit the decade as any of this music. He obviously eventually ends up being replaced by Kelly Hansen by the early 2000s. And, the band is at that point has adapted to, I think, because of his health issues and inability to perform, they become basically the classic rock ambassadors. I mean, they are the band that has got the catalog that nobody else has, and they've pretty consistently embraced that and put on, from what I can tell, I've never seen them live, but I don't hear anybody ever complain about a Foreigner show. Like, it seems like they put on a great set. People all know the songs. They present them really well. They find great musicians. So they kind of reinvented themselves as this, classic rock show almost. Like, if you're going to them, you're going to hear, even though it's all their material, like you're going to hear all of the, songs and grew up with. And they'll probably bring another band or two out with them that So I think they adapted. I think they figured out who they were. I don't think they did anything here to like ruin their legacy, or there's not a record on here we're going to say, oh God, remember that? Or, um, so I think they adapted pretty well, all things considered. What about you, Chip?
Yeah, you've actually changed my opinion. I had what was the third choice? Dead.
Yep.
That's where I started. But I think yeah, you definitely changed my opinion to adapt it. I think the '91 album is probably a misstep. Probably a record company contract. You're still under contract, and '91 Nirvana hadn't quite broken yet, so it was like lose out. Let's get somebody else in here. Let's keep the Foreigner brand out there, and then the entire music world changed. Um, Catalog probably would have been better off if that one wasn't there, but it didn't harm them at all.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, and I think you're right. They've adapted to today. They brought in a singer who had history in Hurricane, but not like he wasn't a well-known name. He does a good job. He doesn't sound just like Lou Gramm, but I can't remember if I shared this on any of these. So I think I did. Never mind. I did during the Styx episode. I'll repeat it really quickly. When I thanked Lawrence Gowan, who had replaced Dennis DeYoung for Styx, he said, you don't hear me on the records. And I said, like I said, I know I'm repeating this, but I've been a Cleveland Browns fan my entire life, and it's not the same players from the '70s when I grew up. But you're owing to the legacy, and you're doing the legacy well, and you're keeping the brand Styx alive by playing the songs that I know, and you're doing it no harm by singing them. I feel the same way with Foreigner. To me, when I first saw it, I was very saddened by it. Jeff Pilson, Maldonado, what's his first name? Lewis. Yeah. And there was another guy. We're on a Good Morning Sacramento kind of TV show, like a 9 a.m. thing, and they sang a couple songs. And the interviewer, the host, kept saying, "You guys are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and how does it feel? You have all these hits." And they're all like, "Yeah, we are preserving this legacy, and they're great songs, and we are doing our due diligence to make sure that people get to keep hearing those songs. We're not on any of those songs, and we're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but we've been blessed by Mick Jones, we've been blessed by Lou Gramm, and so we want you." And Jeff Pilson flat out said, "We know this is not for everybody, and if you want the original lineup, if you want to hear Lou Gramm sing these songs, if you want the original members, like, it's your choice to buy a ticket. We are just doing the best we can to play the songs that you know and love." And I sort of love that. Like,
Yeah.
in a way, I almost wish they changed their name to like Juke Box Heroes or something, so that you know that it's a musical theater performance of songs as opposed to the guys. But I don't think Rick Wills is going to listen to this episode, but no offense, but like, I don't need to see like a 75-year-old playing bass out on stage, right? Like, I'm okay with these songs. They have no problem selling tickets. I actually looked before we got on this morning at they're playing at the Ohio State Fair. They know their audiences, right? They're playing Ohio State Fairs, they're playing casinos. Ohio State Fair, I'm like, I can probably get a good ticket cheap up front. Almost the entire floor at Ohio State Fair is sold out. It's like the bleacher seats, and those are starting at $68. So like, they're not having trouble pulling people in. Although on the same note, I talked to a friend at work who was talking about going to see them, and I said, like, like, none of the guys in the band are the ones on the records, and he was shocked.
Right. They don't.
But I think it goes back to at the very beginning when I asked you if you guys could name anybody.
Yeah.
You can't. So when I told this guy, but would you know them anyway? And he's like, "Well, I know Lou Gramm." I'm like, "Yeah, but Lou Gramm, he just doesn't have the stamina to perform a full set anymore." So, so long story short, adapt. I think if I can get a cheap ticket to that show, I'll go. I saw them a couple years. It's been more than a couple years now, but I saw them with, man, talk about a night of music. I saw that it was Def Leppard, Foreigner, and Night Ranger. Like a 3-band bill where I knew every word to every song was amazing. And they do the stage right. I mean, at least for that show, it was very Juke Box Hero oriented. So they had a lot of like flashing lights, and they had a lot of neon, and like it was a show. That's all you can ask for with those bands, and they sounded good. You get a younger singer singing those songs, and it was great.
I think in terms of adaptive, as I think about that more and we do more of these episodes, I'm looking for bands that like get out of the 90s with an understanding of who they are. Like the decade didn't screw them up so bad that they're lost and they're never happy again, which, I can make the case for Van Halen as a good example of like, if you go back years, we did a roundtable on them. They're just a good example of like that decade screwed that band up so bad. Yeah, I love the reunion tours they did. I like the reunion album they did, but they really came out of that decade just completely destroyed in terms of who are we? What do we do? What do we make? Who are our fans? Like they were a mess. Motley Crue's another good example of that. Versus a band like this, where it's like, it seems like they came out of the decade saying, you know who we are? We're this catalog of songs.
Yeah.
And we're going to do our best to present these songs going forward. And that's what we do. Like,
when we started this series, like I knew that this wouldn't happen. Otherwise we'd know about it. But like I was secretly hoping to find a Genesis album that has some like industrial moments or, or like a REO Speedwagon album that introduces some rap music or something. And
we might get there.
No, I don't think we will. Like we'd know about that, but that was sort of my hope in this, is that we would find people that were trying to change their sound based on. But I think the example that I can think of offhand, the one example is like Kiss sort of made sort of a grungy kind of sounding record in the 90s, but not too many of the other bands strayed dramatically. And Styx made some different moves that were interesting, but like none of them flipped the script and were like,
yeah. Well, not yet.
Yeah.
So far, it seems like a similar story to Styx. On this one. How about you, Tim? Where you at?
I mean, I guess based on the descriptions, I'd have to go with Adapt, that they stayed afloat with some solid work, doing a lot of heavy lifting there, but couldn't recapture the glory. They definitely could not recapture their glory. It's almost like Adapt and died, because they definitely at this point are realizing with these massive commercial failures, they're not the same band anymore, and they pretty much give it up at this point and just become a greatest hits band. I do want to share some comments from people, what they said about this band. Keith Miller said, I really love Foreigner, including the revamped versions of the classic hits with Kelly Hansen. However, they truly embody what it means to be a legacy act. The existence of several albums filled with them covering their own tracks pretty much sums it all up. Ian McIver said they were dead on arrival in the 90s, back on January 1st, 1990. And now Foreigner is just an empty husk reanimated for the money. Scott Witt said, sadly, they died. Their attempt to become relevant flopped, and Mick seemed to become just happy playing the hits. Nothing wrong with that, but when Styx had recently put out a great material, feels like they could have taken a chance.
That's true, too. That's one distinction with them and Styx, is Styx seems to still be like creatively inspired. And
yeah. Joe Roland said, I'd say they mostly tried to adapt for the most part, but for the most part, they were still seen as the old guard in the new music world. Unusual Heat wasn't a bad album and tried to offer up something a bit more fresh. Unfortunately, Johnny Edwards, while a decent singer, was no Lee Graham, and those were some big shoes to fill. Mr. Moonlight, in my opinion, is actually a terrific album that could have potentially brought them some chart success if only had been released on a major label. Instead, by this point, they were dropped by Atlantic and was put out by Priority Records, a label mostly known for rap and dance compilations. After the failure of the album, along with Lou Graham's brain tumor and the meds he was taking for it affecting his voice, they have started living on past glories. Even with the excellent Kelly Hansen of Hurricane taking over, they only managed a handful of new tunes in 2 decades' time. And Whitney Biller said they actually died before the 90s, as they became a ballad band and lost pretty much all of their edge as rockers. I would have listened to their 90s stuff if I hadn't already considered them dead at that point.
I think all those comments I think are fair. I think, and again, while you were reading that, I was thinking, like, again, the 70s, I can't think of a 70s and 80s band that is making new material that is lighting the world on fire. Like maybe the Rolling Stones, like they have some pretty, but I'm thinking of like Deep Purple keeps releasing records. I don't know anyone that's listened to any Deep Purple record in the last 40 years, like a new album, right? Or cared much about it or seen a video. Whitesnake has released a couple albums in the last 20 years that I own a couple of them. I don't think I've ever listened to them. Like, so I don't know. In a sense, I think it's okay. Like if you have a strong greatest hits, like I said, they're not having trouble selling tickets. People want to hear the songs that are so familiar to them. They don't want to hear new songs. So, you know, good for Foreigner going
Well,
out.
I think these bands also like their fan base isn't a monolith. They're so big that yes, most of their bills, they have the luxury of like their bills are being paid by greatest hits catalog and touring behind those greatest hits. There are another facet of a lot of these bands, and some more than others, that want to hear, appreciate that they are making new music, and maybe they throw a new song in the set, maybe they don't. But it's more like, one, you only get so much material out of people before they die. So it's like, it's nice to have it, but also to me, it just it sends a signal that they care, like that they're enjoying life or they're finding, passion. And it's like, oh, wow, they put on a new record. I'll give that a spin. Now I realized everybody's not going to give that a spin that goes to the show, and that's fine, but and I have respect for the fact that they're like, that's okay too. Like, we don't need to sell 1 billion albums for it to be worth us to make a record, because we just want to make a record because we were inspired to make a record. And if 2% of our audience buys it, that's cool. We don't really need the money. We just want to make the music, So another level of respect for bands that are doing that.
So this band, I guess I wouldn't consider a young current band. I mean, they're a current band, but like a more recent example, which is an old example, would be like Smashing Pumpkins, right?
Yeah.
They keep putting out records, and they'll play a couple songs. Every once in a while, Smashing Pumpkins will go on tour and say, we are playing the new record in full.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll do a second set of our greatest hits. But even Smashing Pumpkins, I'm sure if you look at their more recent set list, are more of a greatest hits, even though Billy keeps putting out records. Like, there's people that want to hear new Smashing Pumpkins, but really people want to hear the stuff like for the mass public, they want to hear the stuff they know.
Yeah. And even going back before that, like a brand like Duran Duran continue putting out records, and in fact, still good music, but they're still going to play all the big hits.
Yeah.
Like they're going to touch on the singles from the most recent record, but you're going to hear, and that's a band that's almost has been around as long as Foreigner. I mean, they formed in 78, even though their first record didn't come out to the 80s, but they've been around almost as long as Foreigner and have consistently put out good material. I mean, maybe Def Leppard is in that category as well. I mean, they've continued to put out records that sound like them. They've updated their sound at times. Obviously, they've been through some shit, Yeah. But yeah. So on the poll, it was 22% adapt, 78% died. So the majority of our Patreon community were in the died category, which we got from the comments. Everybody pretty much, except for Joe Royland, was on the died end of things. So,
and like I said, that's fair. Like if you're looking at the late 80s output, like it sounds different than the 70s stuff. Like they had already sort of tried to adapt by the late 80s and had turned off some of their fan base. They turned off Lou Gramm, to the point where he left the band. So
that's been a theme so far too, is the bands we've picked were super strong in the 70s and early 80s, started to struggle at the late 80s. And that's been the source of members leaving and lack of creativity, and more so than Nirvana broke and suddenly they no longer knew what to do. Like that. We haven't found that example yet.
So maybe we're casting our net too far by picking 70. Like Warrant has been accused of making a grunge album. Like, and they tried to adapt to like Belly to Belly, Ultraphobic. Those albums got some comparisons to like a poor man's Stone Temple Pilots. So maybe like by going back to the 70s, by the time 90s rolled around, most of these bands were already struggling anyway. Maybe we need to shorten our distance to like bands like hair metal bands that change their sound or something like that.
Yeah, because you can make them. It's not the same category, but like Tom Petty, I don't feel like ever had. I mean, actually after the 90s is when some of those albums I'm like, like Mojo and some of those I don't necessarily love. They have a couple good songs, but they're not like packed with hits the way that even stuff in the 90s is.
Well, even a band like Duran Duran would be interesting to do.
Yeah. Well,
So-
we have done Duran Duran in the 90s. So, and Tom Petty in the 90s. People can check those out. But this was fun, and it was long too. This was a very long episode, guys. You're gonna give me a lot to edit.
So a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about with Foreigner. That's right. And if you would like to be a part of our community and comment and vote on these polls, you can do so by joining us at digmeoutpodcast.com. Well, actually, the union is where you want to join, but it's all there at digmeoutpodcast.com. It's where our archive of over 800 free episodes exists, history of the band posts, and new release roundups. The paid subscribers get bonus episodes, which will begin recording and releasing shortly on the 70s, 80s, and aughts rock that we cover, new release reviews, and access to our private Discord community. And then you can also suggest records for our podcasts via digmeoutpodcast.com. That's open to anyone. You don't have to be a Patreon member. Just go there, fill out the form, suggest a record, and we'll put it in a poll for a future episode. All right, gentlemen. We worked past my lunch, so I need to eat. I need to get some lunch. I'm getting a little hangry here.
Alrighty.
All right, so for Jay and Chip, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.